Like,
Yeah.
Like let's be like, we can agree it all kind of kicked off in an instant, sure. But this idea that he's like, I want to skin me a wobble,
Yeah.
like, come on now, like, let's,
It's a little speculative at this time.
I mean, that's highly speculative. Yes, the guy's at a track meet and he's like, you know what I need to do today? I need to kill a white person. Like,
Yeah. Any white person that talks to me, I'm going to kill him. Yeah. What do you think about it, Joe?
I'm learning about the story now. So.
Oh, okay, cool. So here is Tim Pool's. So I don't know if you've heard about the story about the black kid that stabbed the white kid at the track meet. That's what they're commenting on. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
So here is Tim Pool's opinion on what we just heard.
What is it? Nothing matters but this. He was at a school event at the wrong team's tent with a knife. He clearly chose murder than to walk away, cut and dry here. Nope, wrong. Imagine you are invited to a party at someone else's house and you are legally carrying a firearm. And then a fight breaks out and or like an altercation breaks out between you and some guy and, there's drinking involved or whatever. I'm not trying to make a 1-for-1 scenario. I'm trying to create a potential scenario separate from this one with similarities. You go to a party. Let's say you go to a party. And some guy starts saying stuff like, yo, man, get out of here. And you're like, I can do what I want. I was invited to the party. Verbal altercation escalates. And then the dude, you're standing there and you pull your sweater back and you've got a gun. You put your hand up and say, don't come close to me, bro. I'm warning you right now. Do not come close. Do not take another step. Mm-hmm. Then the guy grabs your arm and makes a move. So you draw your weapon and you use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would probably
make the argument. You have no right to defend yourself when you're being attacked by a guy.
Yes.
Make the argument. By all means, go ahead and do so.
Go ahead.
I mean, you have to have a reasonable belief and an objectively reasonable belief you're facing serious bodily harm or imminent death. So Tim's fact pattern here, I almost said Dim. Tim's fact pattern here don't work. I mean, like somebody grabs you, you're not allowed to just start going, pew, pew, pew everywhere. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
You grabbed me!
Now, to be fair, though, this guy does have some arguments he could probably raise. They're probably not going to work. It's probably, Texas has what's called imperfect self-defense, meaning if you claim self-defense and it turns out, well, no, you were just being a spaz, well, it could turn murder into manslaughter, which is a significantly better option as far as prison time you're looking at.
My years on what you just said there, my years of streaming with Andrew Branca have taught me that your fear of serious bodily injury or death has to be both subjective and objective.
Yes, it has to be.
And I think that's what you're trying to say. It's got to be objectively something that people would, and also subjectively that you actually knew, that you actually had, believed it yourself.
Yeah, and I bet he did believe this, because I'm sure he's going to say, I'm sitting there, and these two, the white kids look like they're a couple of corn-fed hosses. They come up, and it's a bunch of bunch of people, and probably, like, I don't know, white kids, black people, a bunch of people all from, like, somewhere else. Like, I'm sure they weren't just like, excuse me, sir, may you please leave the tent? And I'm sure he wasn't like, oh, I'm so sorry, gentlemen. It's just the precipitation has concerned me, and I don't wish to get myself wet. I'm sure there was, who the fuck are you? Fuck you. No, fuck you. Blah, blah. I'm sure it kind of went back and forth. So I'm sure it was escalating. I'm sure he's like, oh my God, there's a lot of people around me. These guys might start river dancing on me in a second. I mean, it's a bunch of, well, they're Gen Alphas, not Zoomers, but like that could happen. The biggest thing is, I really am praying to God somebody filmed it. Like, that's the one thing about these kids these days.
Yeah. Like,
this probably got filmed. So I'm sure it was a bit of an intense situation, a bunch of kids jawing off at each other. But his idea of, they're trying to kick you out because I'm sure he was being an asshole himself. That he's going to have the right to start stabbing everybody. It's like, no, bro, like, it don't work that way. And I'm sure he's, it's more manslaughter than murder, really, at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Let me get.
Well, I do need to correct a legal point here, because that idea of objectively and subjectively reasonable, that's a perfect self-defense.
Yeah.
So you have lethal self-defense in response to the lethal threat. So that's perfect self-defense. But some states, including Texas, have the idea of imperfect self-defense, where it can be subjective but not necessarily objective.
Yeah.
And so there is this nuance in Texas law where there's this possibility that it might not necessarily be objectively reasonable, but nevertheless the jury could conclude that it's basically partially justified, which gets you possibly to a manslaughter verdict. Now,
Yes.
I will emphasize here that based on the evidence we currently have, that feels like a long shot possibility, but it feels like a technical possibility under Texas law.
That's probably going to be his only shot, because it's, and the idea of imperfect self-defense, Chad, is basically, I'm a big idiot. And the idea is, like, let's say somebody, like a kid, like somebody came at you with a Nerf gun, and it's clearly a Nerf gun. And, Kurt's walking toward me on the Nerf gun. I go, stop, Kurt, don't come closer. I'm scared. And then I pull out a gun and shoot him. And I'd be like, well, I thought it was a real gun. The jury's going to be like, okay, yes, Sean, you're an idiot. You're completely stupid. You truly did believe this, but it doesn't work and we can't allow it. So you're guilty of manslaughter.
Yeah, because that's the way it would work. Because they would consider that to be reckless, right? You were being more reckless in that.
Well, I mean, you're not believable. Like no reasonably prudent person would have believed this to be a threat.
Yeah.
You're being penalized for being an idiot, which, if you're that dumb, if I'm that stupid to have shot a man carrying a Nerf gun, I probably should be off the streets. So
what about this? This is a question for Joe. Hey, Joe, we have felony murder rule here, meaning death, intent, or not while committing a dangerous felony is a capital charge, first degree. Knife in school grounds is a felony. Can you guys discuss it?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it does.
In some states, the felony murder has to be in the course of the commission of the felony, which wouldn't necessarily be clear here.
I mean, is it an ongoing felony every moment he's there, that he's engaging in a felony of carrying it? And you could also say that, but for the felony, there wouldn't have been a death here. The philosophy behind felony murder is you're creating this dangerous situation. We're not going to allow you to rely on manslaughter. So over here, the felony he's committing is, assuming it is a felony, I'm not positive that's true. We should probably double check that. But assuming carrying a knife on school grounds is not simply a misdemeanor, but a felony, in that case, that really could be an interesting wrinkle here, which I think changes the entire equation, because for him bringing the knife, there wouldn't have been this death.
Yeah.
Not all felonies qualify for felony
usually
murder.
it has to be an inherently violent felony or inherently dangerous felony. Itself.
But okay, is carrying a knife on school grounds, isn't it a felony?
Google looks like it's saying it's just a misdemeanor unless you're doing it with intent. And it may not be clear he did that with intent. He might just had a knife on him. And then he's like, oh shit, things are going. And then.
Yeah.
Right. So if it's just a misdemeanor, then it certainly wouldn't change the calculus here. So,
and also, it's just, I think, remember, guys, you also have to look at this in the sense of, and I've said this before, is this the really way we want to have justice and dole things out?
Yeah.
We have a murder issue. We have a manslaughter issue. Do we really need to tack on felony murder? Even if, let's say, it is applicable, is that really what they envision this law being applied to? And I don't think this is probably necessarily what they want.
Even if it is felony murder, you still might be able to make a self-defense argument, even in that context. But
I don't know. No, because it wouldn't really. Maybe, but
let's self-defense that's an interesting question. So if you're in the middle of robbing a bank and someone attacks, I don't think you're correct.
No, if you're robbing,
and someone attacks you and they're about to kill you, I don't think you have a self-defense situation.
No, if you're robbing a bank, you don't have
felony
a right to self-defense. But let's say if I have an illegal gun on me, I'm a felon in possession of a legal gun, and someone attacks me, and I respond with that gun, yes, I have a right to self-defense.
But there it's a misdemeanor.
Clients do that.
Carrying a gun as a felon is not a felony.
If I'm a felon in possession with a gun, I'm saying I'm committing a felony. I'm a felon with possession of a gun, and someone attacks me, and I use that gun to kill them.
Right, but I'm going to ask you, if you're a felon holding a gun, is the act of you holding a gun itself a felony?
Yes.
Yes, generally.
Possession of a gun by a felon is a felony, yes.
Yeah, I've had clients like this before. Like the one time the guy shot, he accidentally shot at the cops.
Yes, having
so he didn't knock on the door properly.
Having the gun is a felony. So in that case, if someone attacks me and I shoot and kill them, I will not be charged with felony murder, because I still have a right to defend myself. So I can be charged with a gun violation, but I won't be able to be charged with the felony.
But but that's at the end of the day, ultimately, all these self-defense claims are probably going to fall apart.
It's very thin.
I'm sure the video is going to be very helpful, and I'm sure that at some point he's talked to the police, because it sounds like he shut up right away. Which
of course
he did. He gave it up right away. Yeah, he's admitted it.
I'm sure he said many interesting things that's going to be very relevant.
Well, the initial things are saying I did it. Okay, that's not the best, but it didn't sound like he gave a whole in-depth discussion there. So he gets partial credit for shutting up.
Well, go ahead.
You're assuming he shut up once they got him to the police station, which is probably...
Yeah, I'm hoping. Well, I'm trying to give him good faith. I'm good faith carrying this guy.
We got one more reaction from another YouTuber that I want to just go over. And again, so we heard the right version, we heard kind of the centrist right version, and now we're hearing the extreme left version. And this is our boy, the amazing Lucas.
Then would consider, I believe it's a felony. Class 3, a 3 felony. Yes, that he would be guilty of.
Maybe.
But he could be found guilty of that and then also get away with murder or manslaughter. 100%. That can absolutely possibly happen. And then when it comes to, class 3 felony, I mean, what are we looking at? Probation?
5 years.
What, house arrest? Do some community service? Yeah, I'll take that any day over a conviction over manslaughter or murder. Give me a break. Damn. As I said, what's happening is exactly what's happening. That is they're moving the goalposts, right? And they're moving the goalposts to the knife, which is, I said, what they would do. And they're asking, okay, why do you have a knife? The only reason he had a knife was if he wanted to commit a crime. What? Just foolishness, right? They have this mindset, and I've said this before, where it's like, hey, black person bad. So anything that comes out from this or of this, it has to fit in their narrow worldview of black person bad. So now, if a black person is carrying a gun, why they have a gun? Why are they walking down the street with a gun? Are they trying to rob somebody? Where if it's a white person walking with a gun, oh, Second Amendment, brother. That's right, Second Amendment. That's right, absolutely. 2A, bro. 2A.
Yeah, they're all tools. They're all
and
tools.
And that comes from a perverse, racist mindset, a lineage of evil, as I call it. Just a lineage of evil that just corrupts their brain. So it's the same thing, right? If it had been a white kid with a knife, people have been carrying knives since the beginning of time, right? They usually use it as a form of self-defense, whether it's a knife, a gun, bear.
So obviously, Lucas's endpoint is that this was clearly self-defense because the person touched him, and that touching put him in fear of his safety. Now, I disagree with Lucas, but what do you guys think about the argument? And is he right? Is this really racist? If the races were reversed, would people be feeling different?
I've never met that guy. There are probably people out there like what he's describing, who it's like they have a different yardstick depending on whether the perp is white or black. I've never met that person yet. He makes it sound as if this is like a pervasive thing. I used to watch Lucas actually fairly frequently before I became a streamer. And at a certain point, I realized that I don't think he's crazy left, but when it comes to racial issues, he goes bananas. And I've seen this, and I get it. Like, it's hard for him to have like a rational conversation because it's something that's, if you're talking about abortion issues, you're talking about vaccines or whatever you're talking about, it doesn't feel as personal as when it's something that's affecting you. You feel like it's affecting you far more directly. So I can understand it, but I can't take him seriously whenever he talks about race issues. That there's so many people out there who just have a different yardstick depending on the skin of the perp.
I can't speak to people's motivations about why they're drawing conclusions, simply that they're drawing the wrong conclusions, in my opinion, relating to potential issues that could be potentially developed. I mean, at the moment, we have a police report that refers to witness statements, but we don't have video and we don't really have a complete picture. So drawing any conclusions firmly at this time is a little bit foolish, in my opinion. Basically, all you can do is say, okay, there's these possibilities, and try to give some sort of assessment on what you think it is based on the current picture. It's like the defenses seem weak, but it's possible. And those defenses might go away depending on what else is true, but we don't know that yet.
I do want to ask you guys just real quick. This is a question for everybody. I think this case is going to rely heavily on jury selection,
Probably.
right? Because as you can see, even within conservative or even liberal spaces, you have half the people saying this is self-defense. You got the other half saying this is murder. So how, as lawyers, would you handle a case like this? Because obviously this is going to hinge. If you get an amazing Lucas on the jury versus the quartering, you're going to have very different outcomes. So what do you guys think?
Sure.
I'll start with you.
If you got somebody like Lucas on the jury, yeah, great. You're going to get a hung jury. I don't think we get that far. I think I think they're gonna make an offer. We'll do like manslaughter, and it'll be a little bit of time.
Maybe.
I mean, he could face up to 20 years of manslaughter. I'm sure they'll give him a couple. But the idea of taking this to trial would be supremely. I mean, unless there's something out there in the evidence that's out there, and if there is that really helps him, great. I don't think it's there though. But no, I mean, Jeremy and Lucas they were both. They were the spectrums of just god awful takes in this situation. They both sucked. Tim sucked a little less, but that's when you fence it. You could kind of get away with that. But no, both of them were absolutely awful and were absolutely stupid. So
as a general rule, if we're trying to think about like what's fair and what's justice, if someone may believe, let's say subjectively, that they're really in danger, or this is about to escalate into something where I might be the victim here instead of the murderer, I actually think that justice says in that type of situation, since you broke the law, you should probably get a low-level manslaughter. I think that plea deal feels like justice. Yeah. It's like, because he didn't go in there he presumably didn't go in there looking to kill some white folk. And at the same time, he really acted prematurely within the boundaries of the law. So I think, and so to say he should just walk seems kind of ridiculous. And I think that it really feels like splitting the baby here, as far as giving him a low-level manslaughter. Actually feels like what should be close, the closest thing to justice.
Also, 99 years is ridiculous too. So
yeah, that's insane.
That's what in Texas, murder is from 1 year to 99 years.
5, but yeah,
or 5. Sorry, 5. Yeah, it could be anything in between.
This person gives a $5 super chat and asks about did not provoke the person against whom force was used. So they're saying, is this provocation? Is the fact that you said, "Come at me"? It says if you do X again, you'll see what happens. Yeah. Is that provocation?
I think you can make an argument it's not provocation. It's like, stay back, don't come at me. I mean, he's.
I think the law considered a warning.
Yeah, it's a warning, like, because you're allowed to say, "Don't put your hands on me." Right. Is that a provocation? Is that a challenge to you
to come put your hands on?
Yeah, if you're gonna f around, that you're gonna find out. Like, you're allowed to tell people, like, stop, Mr. Ne'er-do-well, do not accost me.
The provocation has to be provoking the fight.
Yes, yeah. And the provocation is if he had, like a good example of that, it would be like, the stuff these like RL streamers are doing to people. They're provoking, they're trying to elicit a response. Merely telling you, step off, leave me alone is not a response, is not a provocation. It's just like, I'm trying to respond in a way there. But yeah, at the end of the day, he's still not going to be able to prove self-defense. I'm sure this is going to be the whole thing's a mitigating factor. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he'll get something probably lesser.
The text vet talks about Collin County being fairly blue, Frisco's a little Cali, and BLM is going nuts and raising all this money. But he also, this person, I'm not sure of the gender, also he provoked the stabbing. So this person's also with this provocation. But I think if you warn somebody, don't come to my house or else, or don't touch me or else, I think that warning doesn't mean if provocation has to, it's got to facilitate the person actually doing it, not warning the person against it. Don't come over here is a warning. That's not provocation. But it really depends on, because that's a jury question.
Yeah, of
in
course
that instance, whether it is. So it's a question of fact. So I don't know. Well, let's move, since it's funny. This is one of those things that I thought there was going to be a lot more.
Yeah, this is just one of these ones where
we all kind of agree.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough one, but yeah, at the end of the day, he doesn't really have a prayer on this, but it'll get figured out.
Yeah, I think though the self-defense argument we may think is weak.
It's weak,
but it's not something I think you can just ignore, because I think
it's not 100% a failure.
Yeah,
but it's not the game-winning move for him.
There's precedent. Come to me is provocation. They teach it in CC class. He also kept concealing while provoked. And I'm male, Nate. Thanks. Well, so he said. So this person says there is, which I can see there being. Well, come at me is different than than what we're hearing here.
Yeah.
So and come at me is like, yeah, please come. Let's.
Yeah.
That's almost an invitation to battle versus
And-
don't
and-
touch me or else.
Take your swing.
Yeah.
Take your swing. It's
Yeah.
much more of an invitation than.
But I would just say I think it's also in your CCW class, you're probably being taught a little more out of abundance of caution that anything short of I don't want trouble, I'm sorry, I'm trying to leave here, leave me alone. Anything other than that could be seen as provocation by your aggressor or by a jury. So yes, as long as if you're not doing the look, I'm sorry, my bad, let me go, please, like sorry, I don't want no trouble. Those are the things you should be saying, like if you're telling somebody skin that smoke wagon and see what happens, like no, that's not the answer you should give. Now, whether or not it's a provocation or not, you now have to convince a jury, like, oh, you got your hand in the bag, like you get any closer, you're gonna find out.
Yeah, that's
well. Now you have to convince a jury of soccer moms. Well, look, I wasn't trying to sound like a psychopath. I was actually trying to be very nice. Like, no, that's not the thing.
Yeah.
All right, so it seems like we're all in agreement for this provocation. The self-defense is weak.
It's nice to start on a
it's
place
not-
of agreement.
Yeah, it's not crazy.
No.
Our next video is, or our next is we're going to talk to the Supreme Court's 9-0 ruling yesterday, and how for some reason
They're technically like 2 9-0 rulings.
For Trump, the other half thinks it's bad for Trump. But we'll hear the hot news read, and then we'll come discuss in a second. So here is the hot news read. You know what? StreamYard has changed a little bit because they're making this harder for me. All right, here we go. Hard news read.
Will require the Trump administration to facilitate. Breaking news right now, the Supreme Court will require the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That's the Maryland man who was sent to El Salvador by mistake, despite having protected legal status, preventing his deportation to El Salvador, where he escaped political violence back in 2011. Abrego Garcia was sent last month to that country's notorious mega prison, following what the government said was an administrative error. Our Devin Dwyer joins us now with more on all of this. Devin, what is the Supreme Court exactly ordering the Trump administration to do to remedy this?
Phil, this was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court upholding a lower court order that it facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia. As you said, he was wrongly sent to El Salvador, to that prison that we've heard so much about with a history of human rights abuses. He was detained in this country. He is an alleged gang member. He denies those affiliations. Those facts aren't in dispute. But an immigration court here in the United States had explicitly said he was not to be returned to El Salvador for fears of threats to his life. That, of course, has now happened, and the Supreme Court, in no uncertain terms, Phil, said that action was illegal on the part of the Trump administration, and that while it shows deference to the administration in its ability and timing to bring him back, it does need to be done in compliance with due process of law, Phil, and that's a very significant development tonight.
Now, I just want to fill in some holes from the news broadcast. One, this person had been arrested previously, and about 6 years ago was.
I can give the background. I can give the background if you wanted to tell. I'm fairly.
Oh, sure. All right. No, if you'd rather give it, yeah. No. Let me hold on. Let me pull it back up. All right, yeah, Joe. Go ahead.
So the background on Kilmar is he illegally entered this country in 2011. 2019, the United States tried to deport him, and he went through the normal deportation process. He got his due process at that time. And after presenting all his defenses, the judge came out and said, remove him, get rid of him. Then he came up after he had a chance to put in his defenses, he came up with a new claim, which is that he said that there's a certain gang, I think they're called the 8th Street Gang in El Salvador, which wants to kill him. So you can't send me back to El Salvador, otherwise I'm going to get killed. Based on that claim, the court said, okay, so we have this order of removal to El Salvador. We're going to stay that order of removal. That was all back in 2019. Now, during this time, or if you want to from the victim, or I guess the illegal alien's perspective, from Abrego's perspective, he got married to an American, had a kid, and like he built ties, and supposedly he's been working, and his wife swears that he's the most upstanding guy, American or illegal alien you've ever met. Now, when Trump, another factor to play in here is the 8th Street gang, which purportedly wanted him killed. You can believe that or not, but that gang was disbanded and is no more in El Salvador because the El Salvadoran government has done a really good job of cracking down on crime. So there is no threat to him at the present time. However, this stay on this removal to El Salvador has never been technically lifted. So that, and until the order is officially lifted, it remains in place, even if the facts that led to that stay are no longer the current situation. So that's why I believe the Supreme Court said there's an order here. Whatever the basis of the order is doesn't matter. You can't just ignore the order and send him to El Salvador. And sending him to El Salvador was the problem. Let's say they had sent him to Honduras, or they'd sent him to Colombia or any other country. There would have been zero problem whatsoever. So now when the Supreme Court comes out and says, hey, you broke the law when you sent him to El Salvador, I agree with that decision. It makes sense. They did, because until there's a new finding by the court, doesn't matter what we all may know the facts to be, you have to follow what is actually written there, and they failed to do that. But once they what the Supreme Court said is that the court cannot direct the federal government how to interact with other nationalities, with other sovereign nations, because that's purely the domain of the executive branch. And that's why they actually reversed this TRO and said ultimately that you have to facilitate, meaning that whatever the United States can do, assuming that they can get on the phone with El Salvador and say, hey, can you please send us back here? And he'll be sent back here. That is, I would believe, would be facilitation. If they say, hey, can you send us back here? And El Salvador says, no, what are you going to give us for it? That is not something that the United States has to do under the Supreme Court order. They don't have to negotiate with a foreign nation in order to get him back, because that is actually forcing him to execute this return. And that's not a position, that's not a power the judiciary has over the executive branch. So that's what I believe. And that's why they said that the lower court was wrong for implying that the United States has to take every possible step in its power and do it and make sure that whatever they do, that this guy ends up back on American soil. I think that they can facilitate. And even if he does come back, the moment he steps back on U.S. soil, they can call up Honduras or any other nation and say, can you take this guy and kick him out there? Yeah. So, that's why I understand the facts. But if you guys understand the facts of law differently than I do, feel free to weigh in.
I mean, ultimately, all they have to do is have this hearing, determine, okay, yes, you are not entitled to this withholding order, and they avoid that order out, then it's afuera again. So that literally doesn't change much for him. Like, that's the thing holding him. They have that hearing, and he's done, and then he goes again. Now,
and I hope they do that. I hope they do that. I hope Trump goes through that process, because I don't want it to look I don't like the Trump administration having viable claims against them that they're acting fascistically. And I do think it's a relatively simple process to go in there and say, okay, you know what, we made a mistake here. We're going to have him and get a new holding here, removing that stay, and then we're going to send him right. I don't want him going. I don't want them circumventing. I'd rather them send him back to El Salvador. Come back here, have them say, yeah, this situation is no longer dire. You can send him back to El Salvador, and then kick him the hell out.
Well, and that's my concern, because, like, let's say we go through all of that. What is the next start? They violated the court order. It's like, okay, well, we complied with it, and now we're afuering them again. What's going to be there's going to be another we're pulling our hairs on fire again moment for people opposing it. It's like, but we did the thing you wanted us to do. Like, that's where I'm like wondering what's the next step for that, because we give him that hearing.
Even
now?
What still requires the hearing, and
he has the hearing.
Habeas.
Well, I understand. Well, he'll have the hearing, and he'll say, well, it's not the habeas hearing he's got. I mean, he could have his own habeas hearing there, but he already had the deportation order, so he doesn't necessarily entitled to a habeas hearing at that point. He's not part of the proclamation. He had a deportation order. Point. So that once this block is lifted,
I stand corrected.
The deportation order is now running again. And at that point, he's a normal guy getting deported that, we don't buy your claims.
Yeah, so afuera is irrelevant. He's not being deported because of afuera. He's just being deported because he's an illegal immigrant.
Well, I mean, he still gets afuera because he's, Salvadoran and all that.
Someone in the chat asked, what's habeas?
So habeas, guys, it's the habeas corpus. It's the writ of habeas corpus. It's one of those writs you hear, like certiorari, procedendo, Quo Warranto. Habeas corpus goes back to the time of, one of the things that the King of England would abuse people. Well, I'm stuck in a jail. Why am I there? Nobody tells me. It's to produce the body. It's to say why you're here. What are the charges against you? Because now you can contest them. So, for example, the Alien Enemies Act guys, they have the right to go into a hearing and demand, okay, how do you know that I'm over 14 years of age? How do you know I'm Venezuelan? How do you know I'm in trendy arugula? How do you know I'm in all these things?
But that's it, though. That's it.
Yeah,
in other words,
but that's been the problem with both this case and a couple of other cases, is that part was missed. Like even with the case that we're talking about now with the guy they're trying to get back, the due process was skipped in terms of they just grabbed him, said you're deportable, and they deported him without that due process that put him in front of a judge, and the judge saying, "Hey,"
and that is different. Yes,
we have this order saying don't deport him to El Salvador, but by this kind of extrajudicial, we're going to deport him anyway. That's kind of how he slipped through the cracks. So, and that's what the court said. Even if you're here illegally, you get due process.
Yes.
For the court to determine whether you are the person who you say you are and you're able to be deported.
But as I think Joe was trying to illustrate, what due process means isn't necessarily the same in all contexts. So the due process here would be fairly cursory by comparison. We're not talking about like an 8-week trial with witnesses and stuff. We're talking about something significantly less than this.
No, it's called notice and opportunity.
Yeah. So the process is fairly simple, fairly quick, and fairly summary by comparison, but they still have to do it.
Right.
Yes, and an immigration hearing.
It can take literally 10 minutes.
Yeah, and immigration hearings, guys, the immigration hearings are different. The rules are a lot more lax. It's not to the same evidentiary standards as beyond reasonable doubt. I'm not going to say it's fast and loose. It's just, it's more administrative than it is anything else. And yeah, I was just thinking, let's say he's down there in El Salvador. You could take him to the U.S. Embassy. You could have a hearing at the embassy and okay, well, sorry, you're out. We don't believe this is a threat anymore. But they do have to facilitate. And the court really was trying to hint to these judges. I think part of it is we're really tiring of the TRO stuff. You guys are really pushing the limits. Your underlying issue is correct, but the way you did this, did you really mean what exactly do you mean by this, judge? And the judge came out, was like, look, all I'm trying to say is they have to come and tell me what they're doing and what they're trying. She's not saying, oh, his ass has got to be back here on a plane anymore, because she realized, okay, even they are realizing I'm not allowed to do that. So,
and for those of you law nerds out there who want to understand about due process is actually a spectrum. There's a case called Matthews v. Eldridge. It's called the Matthews test if you're in law school. And the Matthews test is what you run to determine what level of due process someone gets. So in criminal law, you get the maximum. You get a full trial, the highest standards, and so forth. And in the immigration context, you get the lowest, which is notice and opportunity to be heard. And the Matthews test lays out exactly how you determine what due process someone is due in a particular instance. So that's what it is. So look up the case Matthews v. Eldridge, and it's literally called the Matthews test.
And there's even case law where when it comes to just illegal immigrants, just deporting them because they're illegal immigrants, there's case law where they even say due process as such is not required. They have this thing that's actually lesser, where they talk about fundamental fairness as a separate standard. So again, the barriers here are fairly de minimis by comparison to things that people are more familiar with. It can be cursory, it can be quick, it can be very fast, but it's not zero.
Yeah, there's still some process.
And that's the thing. So people run around screaming this is a total victory for Trump.
Yeah,
no. I mean, there are some underlying things that takes care of a lot of these, like coming in and getting TROs and all this nonsense. That's kind of dying. Great. But the issue is the Supreme Court has said on both these cases, 9-0, both times, the JGG case and this guy.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court has said, you done screwed up.
Yeah. One thing, well, we'll get to the other case in a second.
Yeah.
But this is a question that I think is relevant to this case. And I want to ask each one of you as attorneys, what do you think about the counter argument from the Trump team? So for those of you who don't know, the Trump team has come out and said the problem here is that the person who was deported mistakenly is a citizen of El Salvador.
Yeah.
And as a citizen of El Salvador, the United States doesn't have the authority to tell El Salvador to essentially kick out one of their citizens back to the United States, especially in that case. So I like to equate it to Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden is in Russia, and they've said, you get asylum here. Let's say they deported him back to the United States accidentally, and we got him. And then Russia says, oh, you know what? Our court said we deported him accidentally. We want him back.
Yeah.
Would we be sending Edward Snowden back?
No.
So how do you guys think so right now, if El Salvador says, you know what? He's our citizen.
Yeah.
And we're not.
And we want to try him. We want to try him.
From what I understand, El Salvador has said he's got his own issues in El Salvador.
Yeah, but I'm saying because he was part of the gift. So they said he's staying here. How does that muck up this system? And do you think that's a viable legal argument from the Trump team that they actually don't have any element to bring? Now, obviously, there's a distinction between whether you can do it and whether you actually can do it.
I find it
so.
This is one thing where I'm like, even assuming that's legally correct, which it might be, for pragmatic reasons, I don't buy this. Like, suddenly the Trump administration is trying to argue, oh, woe is us. We have no power over the almighty El Salvador. That's not how the way they've been dealing with immigration issues, right? When we tried to send that plane to, Panama, and the person said, no, you can't send your plane. And we're like, we're going to make your life miserable. And 30 minutes later, the president of Panama is like, please send the people we give up. It's like, if the Trump administration wants to, they can make this happen. So trying to claim we're powerless against El Salvador is a really weak pragmatic argument.
I completely read the Supreme Court decision very differently. I think that if in order to obtain Garcia, that the United States has to negotiate for him, I think that's beyond what the judiciary has a power to compel the Trump administration.
I wasn't disagreeing with you. I was trying to say for pragmatic reasons, but for legal reasons.
Pragmatic reasons. But you Nate actually brought to mind the fact that there could be plenty of reasons that El Salvador says, hey, we have a long history with this guy. He is our guy, and we want to hold him here for justice. And that if you want him, we're going to want something from you. And as soon as El Salvador says, and as soon as El Salvador would say such a thing, in that case, Trump could be like, all right, keep him. I asked you to return him.
For legal reasons, you're not wrong.
And the lower court seems to be of the opinion that El Salvador is a mere holding place and that they have no jurisdiction over him, in the sense that he's like, it's almost like it's a storage place that you leave a pile of money, and that you can tell that storage place to give me my money back whenever I want. And that's just, that's the ridiculous presumption of the lower court. I'd love to have a conversation with you guys that I had last night on my stream about different suggestions as to what to do with these lower court judges who try issuing these nationwide injunctions, because I saw 3 different suggestions that on X yesterday as far as how to remedy this situation. And I actually was discussing with my chat last night, and they came up with 2 more, which were superior, in my opinion, to the 3 that 3 lawyers on X came up with. So if you guys would like to have that conversation, I would love to chat with you for a few moments.
Well, Congress, the House had a bill that's already gone through the Judiciary Committee trying to deal with this issue. The current proposal on the table basically is, if you had it in 2 or more states, that it would go to a 3-judge district court that would be empowered to issue these injunctions as opposed to regular district courts, which would then be appealable to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's the way Congress is, at least at the moment, dealing with the issue.
Right. But I mean, I just to flesh out for the audience as far as what the nature of the problem is. We've all seen how you have these rogue judges who basically are like, okay, there's an executive order out there, and I believe that this is unconstitutional, and I'm here in the district of the Southern District of Maryland, and I believe that I'm going to now overturn this executive order and basically act as if I have executive power and I can overrule what the president says, which sounds insane. And you would think, okay, we should not give any judges, low-level judges, this kind of power to overrule the president of the United States. But you sort of have to prepare for, we're not setting rules for the Trump administration.
Right,
we're setting rules for how the country is going to operate 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, 100 years from now. So, and we're identifying a problem that definitely seems as if these judges are going out of their lane. But you can understand that there might be scenarios where you would want the lower court, without having to go to the Supreme Court necessarily, to actually override the president. I'll give you a classic example. Imagine 10 years from now, the president of the United States at that time comes out and says, it's illegal. I'm making it illegal for anyone to podcast supporting MAGA, or I'm making it illegal for anyone to practice Islam, or Christianity or Judaism, and whatever bizarro. Imagine that scenario, and now you have people who want to speak about MAGA, or people who want to practice their faith, and they basically go to their local district courts. So when they go to the local district court, should that guy really only be implementing a law for the people who happen to be in the Southern District of Maryland? Or would it make more sense to say this is, that, hey, this is a crazy law. We're not going to have to force people in every district to go get a TRO in order to overturn district by district. That sounds kind of insane. So we need to have a better framework than what we currently have for our judiciary, so that if there really is a bizarro order out there, that it can be overridden without having to go all the way through up to the Supreme Court, so that people aren't going to have their liberties infringed while we're waiting for it to process through the system. And at the same time, that you can't just have the situation we have now, where we have thousands of judges who all think they're the President of the United States and have the power to override him at the mere whim. It's like, I can't believe you fired this guy. I'm overruling your executive order altogether. There has to be a middle ground, and we're trying to come up with like what a healthy framework would be going forward in order to enable the judiciary at a lower level to act when there's something crazy, but not to get out of their lane the way they have over the last 3 months.
You're talking my language, Joe. I really like the way you frame this, because it's like, what do we do when it's President AOC or a Buttigieg or Clinton or whatever, scenario that we have? What do we do then? Do we not want the power to run off to the district court to stop them from doing whatever insanity they dream up? How do we deal with this problem? Because right now we have 94 districts. Some of them don't even cover their entire state. And we have judges who are issuing injunctions that are global, everywhere in the world. And it's like, okay, so how do you deal with that problem? And also the somewhat other pragmatic problem of how do you deal with it when you have judges in different districts that are giving different conflicting orders? How is that supposed to work? How am I supposed to comply with all this at the same time? So it's like, what is the mechanism to deal with this universally? But I really appreciate that you flipped it on its head to remind us that we might want this mechanism someday, whatever it is.
Right. So I'll give you some of the suggestions that I saw. One is that if a district court judge does something, issues, this is from Margot Cleveland. She suggested that she's a professor of law, and she's a great follow on X. And she was suggesting that if a district judge issues a nationwide injunction, that by mandate, it goes to the Supreme Court the next day. I think that is actually a great way to keep these judges in check, because if they know that it's going to last for all of 5 seconds, and then you're going to have these 9 justices are going to be reviewing it, they're going to be a lot more hesitant before they actually just sign it off.
But I think the issue with that is that goes right back to the original case of Marbury v. Madison, where they're going to say you're extending their original jurisdiction because unless you're talking about taking it from an appellate situation.
If you go to a district court and you say this is a right of appeal to the Supreme Court, there's no problem under Marbury.
No, but they have to deny the case, to say we're not going to.
There's certain.
No, if you can make it a right of appeal from the district court without a problem, you can do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's expanding their.
I mean, you already have that. You have a right of appeal from three judge district courts. You have that now with gerrymandering cases. Mm-hmm. All gerrymandering cases are 3 judge district courts. It's a right of appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. They have to take the case. Mm-hmm. So what they're saying is like, well, whether it's a 3-judge court or a 1-judge court, it's like, we just want the Supreme Court to be the court of appeals. You can do that. Yeah. Because it's appellate jurisdiction. No problem.
I know that they have appellate jurisdiction.
The Supreme Court's going to hate their life because their shadow docket's going to be a lot longer, but you can do it.
So in other words, you're saying like you couldn't actually take it directly to the Supreme Court, because that would be extending their original jurisdiction. So as long as you have a court lower than them, right, and it's an appellate jurisdiction, then you won't be extending. All right, that makes sense. You can do that. Yeah.
So I have 3 suggestions I'm going to give you. That was the first one. Yeah, that was the first one. The second one, which was suggested by a follower of mine in Allegan News, is if you go to a district court judge and you get your TRO, you now have the right to move on if you want and press it to the circuit level, and then from the circuit, but it only would apply on not a nationwide basis. It would only apply in your jurisdiction. And if you want to have it applied to your circuit, in that case, even though you're the winner, would have the right to appeal to the circuit. And then if you want it throughout the country, you have a right to appeal. If you win at the circuit level, you have a right to it's almost like on a game show. It's like, you want to push your luck, you want to go further, you think you're going to win at a circuit level, you got the district court judge.
Well, you want it to be like a normal ruling. Like, If
Yeah,
I won a case, it only affects me or in my area. And then if I win at the circuit court level, it only affects my circuit.
And then
Yeah,
if I win,
exactly.
You want it to be regular.
and
That-
you can
and-
split splits.
But the wrinkle here is normally the winner is not able to appeal. Here,
Right.
if you win and get the TRO, you would then be able to go. You get the injunctive relief. You still be able to appeal it in order to broaden it out to the circuit
And that makes
level,
sense.
and then
I like
appeal
that.
it out further to the Supreme Court to try and get it work nationwide. And even if the Supreme Court doesn't take the case, well, in that case, you only would have 13 cases going on around the, as many circuits as we have to get it end up working nationwide, and that would end up remedying the situation. But a more interesting and completely new way of looking at this is that which is the third way I want to give you, is that someone suggested that you could have someone's looking for a nationwide injunction, that there's no such thing, that automatically you need to have a panel of circuit court judges from across the country. And that automatically, so if there's 13 circuits right now, Kurt,
Yep.
is that right? So if
Yep.
there's 13 circuits, you would take 2 judges from each circuit, and then you don't just need a simple majority. You need to have like 70% if you want to get a nationwide
Okay, I like that.
injunction. And that way, if there's a crazy order saying we're going to from the president, or even by statute, it doesn't have to be an EO. It could be a bill that it could be a statute that passes, which says you can't talk about MAGA, you can't practice Islam, or something stupid like that, some ridiculous law like that. So in that case, you can foresee that you would get a 70% turnout, and 19 or 20 out of 26 judges would all say, "Yeah, this is crazy, and we're putting an injunction on this." Bam, immediately. And you would have, and they wouldn't, and this sort of thing would become a rare thing, where in most scenarios they probably, because there's so many people reviewing it and you need such a high level of approval from the judiciary, it likely would not create these TROs. But in those crazy, terrible circumstances, you certainly would expect to get those TROs. And I happen to like that suggestion best, because you're getting you're getting a blend from across the country. You want to overturn the president of the United States? Let's get people from all across the country who are judges and can understand the issues here on a really deep level to decide whether or not we're going to be putting the president on hold. This would certainly require a statute in order to get this to happen.
You're effectively creating a new national court of appeals, basically, is what you're effectively doing. But that's fine.
But I think it makes sense that if you want to override the president of the United States, or you want to override Congress and the president when they make a new law, and you want to get a TRO, you want to get injunctive relief to put a hold on it immediately, that there has to be a high bar, but it is attainable for situations where there's actually some sort of crazy statute or EO that comes out.
And
So I'll ask you guys, which of those 3 suggestions sounds best to you? That's what I wanted to get to. So what we had was this: the 3 suggestions, just to review quickly here. 3 suggestions are: 1, you go to district court. If the district court judge gives you a TRO, automatically, boom, you have a right of appeal. You have a right of appeal to get it up to the United States has a right of appeal to overturn it and go straight to Supreme Court. Supreme Court cannot reject it; they must review it within 48 hours or so. Number two was that if you win, you only get the power influenced in the level of power that judge has. So it would be in that district, and then that person, and then the litigant would have a right to expand into the circuit court and then to Supreme Court. And option number 3 is that we have this compendium of different judges from across the country, and that if they have a super majority of them come out and agree that we're going to issue a TRO, that's the only way you can get a TRO. Which of these seem to?
I like option 2.
You like option 2?
I like option 2, where basically we're just creating circuit splits, because that's a traditional way for the Supreme Court to do things. It also implies that there's more briefing, more argument, and the arguments will be better developed by the time the Supreme Court gets around, because they'll have 2, 3, 4 opinions from the lower courts, so that they have the ability to flush it out, and therefore you'll get better decisions from the Supreme Court. So I like option 2.
Joe, the question here is: would your solution end the circuit SCOTUS justices review stays, refuses for them to the other, like how they do now? Like for instance, in the next case we're going to be looking at, where the guy First Amendment, so they issued like in this case that we're talking about, Roberts issued the stay in the case, the administrative stay, and everybody was like, "Hey, the Supreme Court sided with Trump," but it was just like an administrative stay, so they can read the case. So would the Supreme Court still have that power where that one justice can say, all right, we agree with this stay and it's going to stay in place? Or would you say that the entire Supreme Court would have to weigh in on the temporary restraining order?
Well, I know this from when I tried to ungag Trump. When you go to your local justice of your circuit and try and get some emergency relief, there is a particular justice, depending on what your circuit is, that is assigned to you. If they reject your application, you have a right to go to the other to request that a different justice of your choosing is the one who reviews it.
I didn't know that.
So, yeah, that's what happened with me. In fact, I had good Lawgic file, and my lawyers basically, we both had to go because we're in the Second Circuit. We both had to go to Sotomayor. Sotomayor said GFY, and my lawyer asked for Alito to review it. I asked for Clarence Thomas to review it, and because we're acting separately, and both Alito and Thomas decided not to actually refer it to the court for review. So that's what ended up happening there, is that it ended up getting referred. So you had the entire panel of judges who basically looked at that case and decided that they, whether or not they want to accept it or not, whether to grant the TRO. But you do have that opportunity to really pick a justice who you think is going to be more favorable to you if, in fact, you get rejected on the first level. Now, very rare. It's been like 50 years, they say, since one judge has overturned another judge. However, I do think it's more likely to happen if they refer first to the panel, and then the panel might decide we're going to overrule. So,
what about this from AD? Couldn't Congress use the jurisdictional stripping power to limit national injunctions to constitutional or highly important questions?
Yes, they can. And as I mentioned, Congress, at least in the House, is talking about doing that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they make everything. Here's the problem with that, though, because these judges, they all pretend it's a constitutional issue. They all pretend, the way they pretend it's a constitutional issue is they say the president is exceeding his authority and he's violating the Constitution by exceeding his authority.
Yes, ultra vires. That's all you gotta say.
Yeah, so that's why they all pretend that this becomes a constitutional issue, even if it's something like a money payment. And the Supreme Court has done it actually this week, came out, I think it was this week or last, came out and basically was like, this is a money issue. That's what it was. The Supreme Court did it, I think, last week, and now the Fourth Circuit yesterday was like, this is a money issue. You don't win on just when you're looking to get money from the government. You can't pretend that this now rises to a constitutional issue because it comes via an EO. That doesn't make any sense. So, the problem with just saying you can only deal with constitutional issues is these judges find constitutional issues where no constitutional issue actually seems to exist.
But I also want to make it very clear, though, you cannot divest the Article 3 court from reviewing Constitution. That's
100%.
You have to amend the Constitution for that.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens, if they're an Article 3 justice, they would be able to rule on. But the jurisdiction could be limited to just their circuit.
Right.
But you couldn't say they couldn't look at a constitutional issue.
You could strictly limit it to the parties. You could strictly limit it to the jurisdiction. You can do that.
Although, frankly,
it comes with problems as if when we flip everything on its head, it comes with problems.
Yeah.
I mean, you're saying it's a constitutional issue, Nate. Frankly, the Constitution really only accounts for the Supreme Court. So as far as what the power of these lower level judges are, these inferior courts, I wouldn't necessarily agree that you couldn't strip away their ability to try and read a non-constitutional issue as a constitutional issue.
I'm agreeing with you 1,000%. What I'm saying is that if there's an issue, a true constitutional issue, like there's an issue based on the Constitution, Article 3 judges, which are sworn in, they have the right to judge that constitutional issue. But a non-constitutional issue, Congress can definitely limit their jurisdiction. To strip them of the ability to look at constitutional issues at the district court level, you would need a constitutional amendment to do that.
Yeah.
I would think you would need a constitutional amendment to do that.
But one of the interesting aspects of this is that if we're talking about a TRO or an injunction, those are issues of equity, not law.
Yes, correct.
So almost by definition, an injunction can't be a constitutional issue because it's an equitable remedy. So Congress might have almost an infinitely free hand here to restrict, limit injunctions because they're strictly speaking not law, they're equity.
Which is a fair point.
Yeah.
Let's move on because we are about an hour. It's been like we've been flowing so easily through all these issues. Like I'm running out of topics here. All right, so we did 9.
I mean, we didn't. Okay, Nate. No, damn it, Nate, you're wrong. You're so stupid. There we
All
go.
right, all right, all right.
Yeah,
There.
you should be ashamed of yourself.
All right, all
I'll
right.
tap in for Joe now.
So now we're moving to the next one. All right, so this next one maybe. So we have the tariffs. The tariffs. So now, just so everyone understands the background on the tariffs. So April 2nd, Trump issued these sweeping tariffs on essentially every country on the planet, and he put out the fancy chart, and they gave an equation. Now, the way Trump is, so everyone understands, Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the authority to issue tariffs on other countries, exclusively there. Now, Congress allows the president to issue tariffs only in emergency situations or through the rulemaking process through the APA. So if you go through the rulemaking process through the APA, you got to do the notice and comment period, 180 days. Blah, blah, blah. It's a long time, but you can get tariffs through the APA. The second way you can do it is through emergency action. So in 1970, Congress passed a law giving the president authority to issue tariffs when there is a national emergency, trade imbalances, and so forth and so forth. So with that being it, President Trump issued a national emergency saying that trade deficits were a national emergency and causing these particular issues. And he put out the executive order declaring that national emergency. So with that national emergency now declared, he has issued tariffs on all countries. But the issue is that some of the countries he did issue tariffs on actually had trade surpluses, like the UK and some other countries. And there were also some other countries that had no trade barriers, like Singapore. Singapore issues in Sweden, they had no tariffs and trade barriers. They just kind of let it all in. And they were hit with tariffs. So the argument is that the president's authority in this, so some conservative groups have sued, and they said that the president's authority in this space to issue tariffs under this national emergency is weak at best. Others have said that the president does have the authority and is acting pursuant to the delegated authority from Congress. So the question to the panel: do you think Congress delegating its authority to the president is constitutional? The Congress has, well, the courts have said in some instances yes, some instances no. Do you think that this is a national emergency which allows the president to issue these wide-ranging tariffs on all countries, not just countries within the deficit? And last but not least, what do you think about the way things have been put forward? So I'll start with Nick, since Nick hasn't really been able to. So if you want to talk about this topic, if you're not.
Now, Sweden doesn't have tariffs in that regard. We have export limitations that we apply internally. For certain, I don't exactly remember. But for instance, if a Volvo factory exported to the United States. Now, this is just an example. I'm not saying this is the actual factory. There was a limitation of 5,000 cars. No tariffs, just a limitation of exports to different countries. For some.
But what about imports? Imports, you guys got no tariffs, and people can no import, and there's no barriers to importing anything. So, but now they've issued a 10% tariff on your country, saying it's a national emergency.
Yeah, but many Swedish companies, many of the major, already have production in the United States.
Yeah.
So what happened was, for instance, Volvo said, okay, we will be sending over another model of car to be produced in the United States. And then the rest of it, okay, we will survive. So we're not that affected.
What about potentially criminal? What do you think about it?
I mean, I don't. I mean, like, just how I think the whole thing's going right now.
Yeah.
Kind of get the feeling Trump's kind of like he's trying to do something, and it's like I know, it's like 70 countries lining up. Blank. I don't really think there's 70 countries lining up to come in and like, oh, please, Mr. Donald Trump, please do not harm us with your big tariffs. No, I don't really think that's happening like that. I think the whole issue with China, it's kind of all falling apart. I think this is one of the things Trump has done here. It's not going to work out. Eventually these will get lifted. The stock market will bounce back. But this is going to be one of those big oof moments. But you know what? It was worth trying to see what could be done.
I could not disagree more.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, like, I hope it goes well. I just don't think it's going to pan out.
I think this was brilliant. I think this is a matter of international policy. I think he acted purely within his constitutional boundaries. Because,
I think it's in his boundaries too.
And I think that what he did here actually worked out brilliantly, because what he did essentially was he now all of a sudden has all this revenue coming in of 10%. That this is his baseline. So what did he do? He did what Trump invariably does, which is Trump will ask for the moon and the sun and the heavens up above, and then they come back offering him the mountains that he never, some lesser level thing, and they're like, all right, we'll give you the mountains and half the moon. And he's like, oh, okay, fine. So now he just negotiated for us something that we didn't have. We have now the mountains and half the moon, and we don't have the stars and the sun and the heavens. That's okay. He never really wanted that. This is the way Trump has dealt politically in his first administration, and even more so now in his second administration. I think that, understand this, if he had just started saying, we're issuing 10% tariffs across the board to every nation, and higher tariffs on China, the stock market would tank. Everyone would think you're a terrible person, and there'd be no way to excavate from that hole. Instead, what he did was he said, okay, we're going to have reciprocal tariffs. I'm looking at this based on your trade cheating on the WTO and this other stuff as if you have a 78% tariff on us, and I'm only going to give you a 47% tariff. In this other country, I'm going to give you a 27% tariff. In China, I'm going to hit you really hard. And I'm going to give 10% across the board, even to the island of the penguins. And people were making fun of him for that he was putting a tariff on a place that no humans lived and only penguins lived. But that was actually a shrewd move too, because he was like, I was trying to loophole my way through this, and I was someone who's sending goods to America, who is having goods come in and out of America, and I didn't want to get hit with a tariff. I would say, oh, okay, I'm going to stop off here in this country. I'm going to go from India, stop at Penguin Island, and then say it's being imported from Penguin Island, and that would pay the tariffs. So he's like, no, Penguin Island's tariff too. They're the same stupid thing. We're going to give them a tariff also, so don't think you're saving money that way. So now what he did was this is so freaking genius, is when he starts with a crazy high tariff and then says, okay, you know what? You've all respected my wishes. The entire world, aside from China, has respected my wishes and not issued reciprocal tariffs. So now I'm going to tell you that we're going to have a pause. All these people coming to negotiate with us. Maybe we'll work some time out to try and negotiate with them. Meanwhile, we're still going to keep a 10% tariff that we didn't have 2 weeks ago, but we're still going to keep having that going forward. And the stock market erupts has the greatest day that it's had in the NASDAQ in the last 24 years, since 2008, since 2001, greatest day ever. It just erupts and explodes because, oh, look, he's relaxing the tariffs. He's only taking the moon and the moon and the mountains. And he's not taking the sun and the stars. But it's going to be like practically free trade. I think he was trying to balance free trade. I think that other nations like Germany, like China, we're cheating on the WTO deal that we signed and finding ways to really screw over American businesses. He put us in a much more leveraged position now where he can go to each nation. He could even turn them all against China. He can say to them, hey, I'm going to reduce your tariffs, but only, and I'll get you below 10% if you agree and follow whatever tariff policy we put on China and help isolate China. He has so much leverage now that he never had before, and he can't reveal it coming out of the gate. This is the steps I'm going to take. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. Everyone will be like, all right, we'll just wait a week and he'll reduce the tariffs. He has to have that threat out there so that these nations respond and keep it close to the vest as to what his next move is. And it's worked out to the benefit of America in ways that no other president has ever conceived of employing. And that's what makes him uniquely great as an executive, as the chief executive of our country.
No. I think that's possible, but a somewhat charitable read of the facts that are available.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the European Union is making deals with countries in the Middle East. There are talks about European Union African trade agreement again, which again I said because we did that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And also the energy. It's a new energy agreement between Australia and
Good, Kurt.
the rest of the world are making new deals.
Yeah.
Also,
Meanwhile.
with respect to the president's authority on the straight legal question, at least some of the authority that he's using doesn't seem to speak to tariffs. It speaks to other issues, but not necessarily tariffs. And so there is a lurking major questions doctrine, because tariffs are by their nature such a massive thing that speaks to like the economy and has such major impact. If Congress were going to give this power, that Congress would use more clear language to avoid the president just reading in tariffs into general language. We've seen major question doctrine used in the last administration with respect, for example, the vaccine that the CDC tried to push through. And it's like, no, this authority that's given to the CDC, you're trying to way overread what's there because it's just not there. And I think some of the authority the president's using doesn't really allow him to do what he's doing in some domains.
Yeah, I think the point can't be overstated that him issuing these tariffs is a delegated authority from Congress. This is Congress's authority that he's wielding. So, and I think that is something that we can't overlook. And he's wielding it in an emergency capacity.
Yeah.
And I do think it's a little charitable. Joe's rendition is a little charitable in the sense of China's biggest market are the other Asian countries. I forgot they call it the Asian Pact. The second biggest market is the European Union, and third biggest market is the United States. So yes, this will hurt China, but not, I think, to the degree that people have oversold it to hurt. And let's also forget, if you go to Walmart, 4 out of 5 products are from China. If you go to Target, I think 3 out of 5 products are from China. And a 10% or 20% increase in those prices are going to affect every single product. Everybody's going to be buying higher price products. A tariff, even in when tariffs were first thought about in the Constitution, it was called a tax because tariffs are considered essentially a tax. And it's a tax on consumers, the people buying the goods. So I do understand believing that there was some grander scheme here. But if we just look at what the emergency order says, it says it's for trade deficits, and then it's using it for tariffs. And even if you take it at its face value, which I did, he's saying that this is a national order based on trade deficits. Well, then the countries who have no trade deficits, who have no trade barriers, should then be in court saying he can't put tariffs on me because based on his own executive order, this does not apply.
I mean,
to us.
Even then, you're looking at something that's arbitrary and capricious because he's saying this is the reason, and it doesn't chalk up.
So you think Sudan has a viable claim in an American court against Trump for putting a tariff on them?
I believe a country. I don't know. Country.
Well, not necessarily the country, but I believe like the exporter would.
The business. There's a conservative group suing now, saying exactly this same thing.
I don't understand how that would be.
So a conservative group is saying these tariffs are illegal because the president has overstepped his authority. And the reason why the president overstepped his authority is because the reason why he says he's instituting the tariffs, trade deficits, or on these particular countries, they have no trade deficits. The reason why he's saying because of barriers for like tariffs, these countries have no tariffs and have no barriers. So they're making the point that this arbitrary and capricious. The reason why the president is putting this out isn't the reason what's actually being put on the ground. And it's a conservative group who's making this lawsuit.
I don't care if it's a conservative group or it's a conservative is a very amorphous term. So I don't care if it's a conservative group or the crazy left wing group. The point is the point. So my question is this: I gave the example of Penguin Island and stopping off there, but if they would put a tax on China and then China would decide to ship through the Sudan, even though the Sudan has nothing against us, what would stop them from doing that in order to circumvent the tariff?
I mean, if that happened, though, then you would have the rationale. I mean,
but we don't have to wait for it to happen before you say this is something that he says as a businessman, that's what I would do. So why should I not be concerned that that's what all these exporters trying to send goods here are going to be doing? Well, I think there's a rational basis for it. I think there would be a rational basis test, and I think he can establish that rational basis. So in that case, we have to ask ourselves, I mean, so on the legal end of things, I don't think that Trump has a problem here. And from the political or an economic end of things, this, you called it a tax, and certainly tariff is defined as a tax. But the question is, who gets hit with that tax? The assumption that the legacy media has been pounding home is this is a tax that's paid by the end user, the consumer, and you're now going to have less buying power because of this tax. Now, it may end up costing more dollars. That doesn't mean you're going to have less buying power, because if in effect there's so many things, the factors that go into what a market price ultimately is, that yes, a tariff will likely be borne to some degree by the end consumer. But you also have to consider that if he's correct in saying that by engaging in this type of economic protectionism, that I'm going to get all these countries to start investing in America, building plants here, building opportunities here, that our dollar can become stronger, our economy can overall become much stronger, and your ultimate buying power, despite it might end up being far greater because of these tariffs. I'm not saying that I can tell you that definitively. I'm not going to go out there and say that because of these tariffs, we're going to be richer. What I would say is this. I think that the same way I'm reluctant, because I'm sufficiently mature enough and old enough to recognize that there are so many factors that go into the future. And that's why we have a stock market, because people don't know how prices are going to work. That when these people come out there with this definitive statement and they are saying to you that tariffs mean you're going to pay more money, I can tell you right now without any reservation, they are either morons or liars, because they either don't know and they think they know, or they're liars because they do know that they don't know and they're still pretending that they know. I don't have that level of hubris. I have enough humility to say I cannot tell you how tariffs will affect the price of goods that are produced here. And tariffs, look, they can affect things that are even bought here domestically, because that person who's producing domestically might have to import certain raw materials and different things, and that would be baked in too. I'm not going to kid you and say this is what will happen. I'm landing my plane here. I'm not going to kid you and say this is what will happen. But I think that anyone who said that it's going to be a positive for America, but I can tell you that it's very possible it can be that way, and that those who are saying it definitely will end up being a financial negative for Americans are either ignorant or acting in bad faith.
Well, I just want to be very clear.
And I'm not saying Nate. I'm saying
I know, but I want to be very clear. Who's saying prices will be raised? Trump's economic advisor, his person for the Office of Trade, blah, 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 blah. He said prices should rise. Trump has gone on record and said prices may rise, and all because of him rising tariffs. So to pretend that, hey, even if we raise tariffs, prices may or may not rise. Every economics book on the planet says if you raise tariffs, it is more than likely. It is not 100%, but that's just like, that's just like saying shoot me in the chest may not kill me, but it's a likelihood that it could. So what I'm saying is
those economic books, though, that's a false citation.
Is going to raise
I'll tell you. I want to explain
the majority of cases. In the majority of cases, the
reason that's a false citation. Which yes, every economic. I was a finance major. Okay,
even Trump. Me too.
What I'm saying is, I was a finance major before I went to law school. I'm telling you this: all of those books, those economic books, which tell you that tariffs will translate into higher prices, are dealing in a scenario where there are not already tariffs. So if you're the first person to put tariffs out there, you are now creating higher prices throughout the marketplace. But part of the thought behind that is if you put tariffs, they're going to put tariffs. But what if you put tariffs and they don't put tariffs? What happens then? Then that country that's not putting tariffs is the one that's being victimized. So now what Trump is basically saying, and you could be factually correct, I'm not going to dispute this, that with respect to some of these countries, they're not putting tariffs, but there are countries who are exporting to our country billions of dollars worth of goods, who are hitting us with tariffs when we try sending back to them, and to try and level out the playing field and then pretend that Trump leveling out the playing field is now this brand new concept in the world of tariffs being implemented is not an accurate reflection. And that's the scenario those economic books are talking about. So to use those economic books as a source when the facts are very different from the underlying facts that those economic perspectives are traditionally talking about is not really assessing the situation, I think, in a fair way.
Well, I mean, you're still moving from the current ground state. So, like you're at an equilibrium based on the current tariffs, which do exist, and then you're moving to a state in which the tariffs are up.
That's
Versus
true.
that. So you would you're basically the same universe as if there were no tariffs versus I'm creating tariffs. To I'm at a ground zero state versus I'm inflating tariffs. It should have a comparative effect. Now,
That's a great point. Great point.
I will say that if the idea here is to move things inside the United States, that is a worthy goal, but that only sort of makes sense if the tariffs are permanent, because people are unlikely to build factories and create substantial capital investment in the United States, because that's a huge outlay unless it's economically worth it, which would have to be paid off over a long period of time. And so the only way to do that is to keep the tariffs in place for a substantial period of time. And then I think you have to be honest and be like, well, in the short term to medium term, prices for these goods are going to go up, because in the short term to medium term, we have no choice but to import them because we can't create them in the United States because the factories have to be built. But if in the long term, this is going to be good because we're building them inside the United States, which increases our economic power, increases our national security, et cetera, and so forth. So it's long time worth it. But I think you sort of have to make that case. So
that's a fair point. I agree with everything you just said.
Let me let Nick was trying to get this. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in this, you have the uncertainty. What will happen tomorrow, in a week from now? What will be retaliation? And costs, if it is 5% here and there, if you are transferring production from one country to another, that is not that so much important as certainty. You don't want to build a factory in
anywhere.
Let's just say a country, El Salvador. I have no idea what the status is there, where fluctuations are high. You don't want to. 25 years ago, a huge influx to Turkey of building factories. Then Erdogan showed up and decided, I kind of like dictatorship, and factories stopped moving there. So you have the cost is less important than certainty. If you know what the cost will be in a 5, 10, 20 year period, then you know how to conduct yourself towards that country, how to calculate it. As of now, it's really hard to calculate. I mean, I have some of my members who are, well, not members, but some of the companies where I do my work, where I negotiate, are now at a standstill. Not a standstill in production, but the containers are now in the middle of the Atlantic waiting. Because will he lower it? Will Trump lower it again? Okay, now we can go to port. But as of now, there is quite a standstill.
What happens a month from now?
Yeah, what happens a month from now?
They got to come eventually. But we're running out of time, and I want to move on to some super chats because they're like flooding us right now. So I want to get them, and they're from all the different channels. So I want to at least give them, since you paid your money, I'm going to at least get those questions. I'm sorry. Were you finished your point, Nick? Before I get to the super chats.
Yep.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay, so let's just knock some of these out because they're all on point. This is about the insider trading. So for those of you who don't know, Trump, before he announced the 90-day pause, he put out a thing on Truth Social, great time to buy. And in all the markets, you saw this spike right before the announcement that a whole bunch of people bought a whole bunch of shit stocks. Trump makes the announcement, and then people made like a shit ton of money. So do you guys have any issues with the insider trading? And do you believe that Trump's now it's a good time to buy has some legal effect in terms of market manipulation?
Now is a good time to buy as a public statement to the entire world.
Yeah.
How is that market?
Yeah, it's insider trading with everybody.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it is. Please don't attack me.
No.
I'm not attacking. I'm just asking. I'm thinking through. I think Drop Barracuda here is trying to say that to the extent people are claiming that this whole tariff situation was designed for insider trading, doesn't his doesn't his statement of now is a good time to buy serve as a defense to that? Because he's making a public statement recommending everyone go out and buy because prices are about to go up.
And it's so nebulous too, right? It's like it's a great time to buy because the market. People were saying that for 3 days before even everybody was saying it's a good time to buy. Markets are low, so I think. Don't get me wrong. Everything Orange Man does, they say it's bad, but I don't think you can claim market manipulation based on that.
I mean, the general advice for centuries has been buy in dips.
Yeah, but
it's not like it's a trade secret.
Yeah, if you said buy now because I'm about to lift the tariffs, then you got something different. But he didn't say that. There's one. Could POTUS be putting tariffs on all to prevent goods with zero tariffs? That's the point that Joe made. The pass through. That's what happens a lot of times with Vietnam. China would send stuff to Vietnam. Or what actually what China's doing now, they're sending all that stuff to Mexico, and then it comes up into do for the. So that's why Trump hit the 25% tariffs on Mexican car imports to try to hit China.
Some countries are really loose on what qualifies as being made in that country.
Already cut it.
And that's the economic reason they do it.
Swedish bacon is.
And trust me, Poland Spring doesn't come from Poland.
Florida paper companies suing Trump administration over tariffs. We talked about that doctrine of Emily, and we're talking about that. The major questions doctrine, lame duck non-politician president with celebrity popularity, zero cares. He's executing a wish list of items on both sides. Interesting take. If what's it? It's not if they will use other countries to bypass. They already do. We talked about that with China.
But his point I think his point is responding to what Kurt was saying is like you're jumping in front before they actually do it, and that TextFed is saying they already are doing it in other ways to circumvent sanctions.
Thank you, TechVet. That was fair. The best way to combat terrorists is to boycott those products effective. Seriously, it's going to be tough when 4 out of 5 products in Walmart. You can't avoid them all. The price is relative. If you don't have a job, jobs are very expensive. And I think people are also failing to realize that if you make, let's say, for instance, if you make an item, an iPhone in China, it costs you $1,000. If you make it here in the United States, it's $3,600.
And this with the new factories being built is, but the old jobs will not come back. They don't exist anymore.
But just as a factual matter, if an iPhone is built here in the United States based on what we pay on minimum wage, $3,600, because Chinese they get paid $200 to $500 a month.
Yeah, but Chinese do it because labor is cheap.
Exactly. Yeah.
We in the West, if we were to manufacture iPhone, it would be automated.
Yes,
because production is much cheaper. So this $3,600, no, but it doesn't mean that jobs will return because the laborers of 30-40 years ago do barely exist in the West anymore, because if you build new, you automate.
Yes.
What took 40 laborers?
U.S. labor costs is some of the highest in the world.
They are the highest in the world, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, the incentives there are to try to automate, and that will only be an increasing problem.
Yeah, the old laborers are. I mean, it's roughly somewhere, if I remember correctly, what took 30 laborers to do 30 years ago takes one technician today.
I'm an economist who supports tariffs, says Jack K. Everyone ignores most of the deals are billed in the United States, which would mean they can drop the tariffs. But again, that doesn't mean the problem is that
the problem there is that you still have to import the goods. Yeah.
So and even like for instance, coffee, you can't grow coffee here. You're gonna have to input that coffee.
You can't grow much coffee here. There's some in Hawaii, but
that's it.
No, you do have a lot of rare minerals, but the extraction of it is quite dirty, and we all rather do that in a third world country.
And I think people need to understand this. Trump put 20% tariffs on China about in his first term. China absorbed those costs internally because it was still cheaper for them to absorb the 20% cost and still ship the goods at the price they were at than for people to make them here in the United States. So that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about
and China's problem, though, is it's costing them more and more now. So even China now has its own China.
Trump got the results he wanted with the tariffs. He isolated China. Facts. to get them to trade fairly, stop stealing from the world. China
Yeah.
it will start to comply. Well, we hope.
Europe,
we hope.
but now European Union, or not European Union, but countries within European Union are talking about lowering that. We have had tariffs on Chinese cars for many, many years. Now there are talks about lowering tariffs, especially on Chinese electric cars.
Yes. Now, the last item here that we'll talk about before we get out of here, and again, thanks everybody for watching. Please visit everyone's channel. We usually do this at the end of the day, but I wanted to try something different. I want to give everybody a chance to promote their channel now, and then we'll do it one last time to circle back before we get into the last topic, which is going to be Mayor Adams. So let's do this one last time. Let's start with, Uncivil Law, since you're right next to me. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm at the channel Uncivil Law. Just do a lot of legal issues, particularly Court of Appeals and Supreme Court cases, and I will be covering the Karen Reed trial, which currently seems like it's scheduled to start on Tuesday of next week. I did the Karen Reed trial part 1, and it was a very entertaining clown show. And I expect part 2 will be just as entertaining, if not more so, for not the least of reasons that the lead investigator has since been kicked off the force, dishonorably discharged for his wrongful conduct partially related to this case. So it could be one hell of a trash fire. So make sure to tune in for that. Will be a lot of fun.
Potentially Criminal. What's going on?
Guys, not a whole lot. You can find me at Potentially Criminal here on YouTube. Tonight, it depends. I'm still kind of torn between the things I'm going to look at. We might be looking at the police report that got released regarding the stabbing in Texas. I know we already talked about it here today, but I actually might take the time to go over and look at it tonight. Still kind of figuring out a couple different things there. I am tomorrow night going over the Carl Jobst, Billy Mitchell defamation lawsuit, which apparently Carl Jobst is still doubling down on how he's an innocent boy and did nothing wrong. But it is out there, and it is very, very interesting, and we're going to take a look at that tomorrow night. And also, Karen Reed is starting. I will be watching it. It will be at night just because I got, next week, for example, for me is completely wasted. So it'll be in the afternoon or evenings I get to catch up on Karen Reed.
Let's jump to Nick. Nick, what's going on? What do you got coming up?
Well, as of now, I am in verdict watch in the Texas v. TK47 capital murder trial. And the core of the entire state's case is cocaine stripper girl testimony for a plea deal. Yep. So it's very, very solid. Other than that, that is happening. The verdict what starts in roughly 45 minutes. You have an invite in the internal chat there if you want to join me. But other than that, I am going to start covering with Dave, the Michigan versus Christopher Schur.
That's a good one, too.
Right. That is white cop shoots black man claims justified shooting.
Yeah, this is the one, if you guys ever saw it, they were fighting over the taser.
Yeah.
And the black guy had the taser. And, while he's on the guy's back, the cop's on the guy's back, pulls out his pistol and right to the back because the guy's holding the taser. Yeah. So,
That reminds me of that Atlanta case where the guy turned around and pointed the kids at the cop and the cop shot him.
That was a clear. He's described.
Yeah, no, this one though is 100%. Like they were wrestling over the taser. The guy had the taser. The guy wouldn't give it up. Like the cop was physically trying to pry it out of the guy's hands, and the guy had it. Like there's video, you could see him on the ground on all fours. He's got the taser in his hands. Yeah. The cop's on his back and just.
Yeah, my issue there is when you look at the video, you can see him grab the guy's neck, pull it down to the ground, and then fire in the neck.
That doesn't sound.
That's the issue.
Well,
I mean,
it has more issues, but
but I always look at it as if he hadn't have done that, that doesn't change the calculus too much. Like he forced the guy's head down, and but if he hadn't have done that and just up to the back of his head and shot him, I don't think it matters. It's did he, why is this guy does not want to get arrested and is grabbing the taser? It's like, sorry, homie.
Yeah. We will have we will start the coverage on Tuesday, and we will have Andrew Branca as a guest, me and Dave. So we will go through the baseline of that case on Tuesday, and then I believe the trial starts early mid-May.
Now, Nick, can you do me a favor? Put everybody, if you can, put your link into your channels in the private chat. Then I can put it on the or if you can, just put it in the chat. Well, put the links in the chat so people can know where your channels are at. So
let's see here. I will.
Oh, if you want me to do it, just put it. So I want people to be able to click.
As a comment, this is the link to that live on Tuesday.
Okay. Let me move it over to Joe while everybody else is doing that. Joe, what do you got coming up?
I have Karen Reed also. Next week I'm on trial. I'm going to be starting that on Tuesday. I don't know if if the opening argument is going to end up being Monday or not, but Monday is Jewish holiday. So starting Tuesday and the rest of the week, I'm going to be doing Karen Reed. I'm going to be doing it from being on location because I'm going to. I'm going down. I'm going down to Virginia Beach. So.
Nice.
It's for the Passover holiday. So I normally stream nightly, and I intend to stream nightly next week also, but I'm not going to be streaming Saturday night or Sunday night because of the Jewish holiday. I'm not going to be streaming Karen Reed on Monday, assuming the trial starts then, because
jury
of the
selection is still Monday.
Is it still going on Monday?
Yeah, they're probably, it looks like they're going to try to pick 18 total, and they've got about 15 or so 16 picked.
Yeah, so Tuesday I'll probably be streaming from home, and I'll probably drive down to Virginia Beach Tuesday evening, and then I'll be streaming the rest of the week the Karen Reed trial. And I highly recommend you guys check out Kurt and his coverage, and you can jump around. And we haven't made any plans to collaborate. I'm not twisting anyone's arm on that, but we haven't made any plans in that sense. And maybe we'll talk off camera about that. I don't know, but. Either way, whether we're individually or working in tandem, it's a really fascinating case, and the fact that this got a mistrial the first time, and some of the screw ups by the courts, which now have it before SCOTUS as to whether or not this double jeopardy issue, I think is a really it's a really interesting issue. Even though I don't think the Supreme Court is going to take the case after I viewed it, I think they're going to say that this is not double jeopardy based on precedent. But and I see that Kurt's agreeing with me on that. So yeah, but that's all next week. It's going to be a very active week. Make sure while you're here, if you are watching me, that you sign up with Lawgic. The link I think is going to be in the description wherever you are, it's gonna be a great week.
Yeah, and if you're completely sick of the Karen Reed case, you can always find my channel, because
check out Nick.
Every trial I cover, everyone.
The Karen Reed case is definitely that for sure.
Oh yeah.
Remember, all the links, I put them all in the chat, so just look at Laid Back Law, just click on those links.
Yeah, can I just talk briefly about the Kohberger case? Because that case is winding up to be even worse than I thought it was. Because the touch DNA wound up being like, it's 25 times more likely it's not Kohberger. And I'm like, okay, you don't even have touch DNA? I'm not even sure how they're getting to probable cause anymore in Kohberger.
And now they're and the one...
Just for the sake of the audience, can somebody just give a brief, and I mean brief.
Kohberger is a college student who allegedly stabbed 4 people in the home at his college in Idaho. That's the quadruple knife murder.
Right. It's the 4 kids who were killed.
And it's interesting that they admit the 911 call is 100% bullshit.
Yeah. So I don't even know how they're getting to probable cause anymore. The evidence against so thin.
But his attorneys did not impress me on that day. So
they were so impressed. Scared, and they were asleep. Apparently not.
Yeah, I thought they were passed out. You mean when she looked like her head got cut off?
2 more stupid. The detractors seem to demand robots or slave labor. Not much choice. It seems to be a full dichotomy. Regulation alone can safeguard. This one, tariffs.
We don't want to go communism on that.
Yeah.
No. Tariff with domestic markets is different. When markets can't complete because of not following American biz practices due to slave labor, etc. If Americans don't have jobs, doesn't matter what products are cheap. That's another instance. So very good points on the tariff. So people are moving with the tariff. So now the last before we get out of here, obviously you guys remember Mayor Adams of New York. The Trump administration said that the charges against him were politically motivated, blah, 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 blah. They said they were going to dismiss without prejudice, meaning they could bring them back as long as Mayor Adams essentially did what he needed to do in New York, because their policy was they don't prosecute people during election season. So they paused it. Then eventually it went to a judge. The judge then went and said, well, this doesn't seem to be both ethical, and it doesn't really make any sense to leave the charges open, especially if you don't believe the charges are really good.
Mm-hmm.
So the judge, in his opinion, said, well, I cannot stop the government from dropping charges. It doesn't make, I can't force them to prosecute you, which was a lot of the left-wing activists were asking for, that they forced the government to prosecute. So they said that would be overstepping my constitutional authority. But what the judge did say is, I can dismiss this with prejudice, because this is the reasoning for dismissing without prejudice seems to be essentially extortion. So what do you guys think about that conclusion, that now Mayor Adams, and it's funny because people were saying Mayor Adams was only doing what he was doing because of this. But now, after they dismissed him with prejudice, he went even crazier. Was like, I'm full Trump now. So he's become even worse without the thing. So it seems like them actually making it without prejudice galvanized him a little bit more, and he's running as independent. So now that we know these are dismissed with prejudice, what do you guys think about the court's ruling, and do you think it was the right thing to do? I'll start with Joe, because this was Joe's topic.
You and I had a big fight about whether or not the deal that was offered by the government was unethical, where I thought this was exactly the sort of thing that they offer to defendants, that DAs offer to defendants every day, of, if you do this, I'll drop the charges, I'll give you immunity, and if you don't do it, I'm not going to, or if you breach, you're not going to be entitled to it. I felt like that's what they were doing here, and I didn't see any sort of pragmatic difference there. I will say that the judge was acting within his purview. The judge clearly agreed with you that he deemed this unethical.
Well, I do want to make one point. You did admit, Joe, that this would be better if they dismissed with prejudice. You said that multiple times. It would be better, but you understood why they were dismissing without prejudice. But you did say it was better if they dismissed. You, Robert Barnes, and I forgot who else said you also believed it would be good. Am I misquoting you, or?
I don't remember taking that position. If I think about it now, would it have been better if they had done it that way, as far as being cleaner? I guess I wouldn't. It certainly wouldn't be worse, if they did it that way. And I can give you that. I'll give you that. It's cleaner that way. I think that the judge clearly agreed with you. He thought that this reeked of quid pro quo, or some other ugly type of term of back scratching, and he wasn't going to abide by it, and that's his purview. He has the right to do that. He had the perfect right to say, fine, I'm dismissing it, but it's with prejudice, not without prejudice, which means that the government can never resuscitate these charges again in the future. And I think it's hilarious from Adams' perspective that he ends up being the big winner out of all of this. So he's like, all right, so I took a deal and then I don't even have to keep my end of the deal. All right, that's great. But yeah, I think that every party here acted fairly. I don't have a problem with the way the judge acted. I don't have a problem with that at all, because while I disagreed with your take on it, I didn't think that it was a crazy take that you had. I just thought that it was, I thought it was one way of looking at it. And I don't have a problem with the judge acting within his purview and saying I'm dismissing it with prejudice. And I respect Eric Adams saying I'm still going to honor it, what I promised to do, because I made that commitment. I'm going to stick by it. So I think every party here acted properly. That's really my take on it.
Go ahead, Kurt.
I like this conversation is too reasonable.
Anybody else? Sean, you want to step in? What do you think about
I think it's actually the proper way to handle this. Like, either you're going to prosecute him or not. And the way this kind of jerked around, fine, but it took him 80 pages to put the fries in the bag. That was the problem. 80 pages of reeing and screeing, and it's like, no. Like, just, here you go, sir. Here you go, Mr. Adams. Enjoy your dismissal. That's all you need to do.
Nick, do you got an opinion on this case?
Nope.
All right. Well, with that being said, everybody, please join us next week as we do another laid back law. And please subscribe to all the wonderful people you see on the screen. As you can see, the legal acumen of everybody on this panel is really, really deep. And I know you guys had to learn something today because we went in some deep case law and some really interesting. And I know people are usually waiting for us to fight and battle out, but that's just not the case every time. So one last time, this is Uncivil Law. Go follow him at Uncivil Law in the YouTube descriptions. Also hit my boy potentially
And Nate the lawyer. Follow Nate too.
Joe, Good Logic. Don't forget to hit him up. And my boy Nick, who I am going to watch for this other crazy case with the cop, because I'm going to have to do a video on it. And I also want to personally thank everyone today. As was an incredible day this morning. I'm having about 100,000 views per hour, and I've had 2 videos hit 1 million views in the past 2 days.
Get it.
Thank you for all the support for everybody who's been watching. I know people in the chat are like, I hate Nate. Well, you may hate me, but I'm glad. Just keep watching. So with that, I will see you guys.
You are Rachel Zegler. Lonnie, have to watch you.
You're watching. Take care, guys. Peace.